a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the hearts of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. God is in the midst of her, and she shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. The nations rage, the kingdom totter. He uttered his voice, and the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Let us pray. Our Father,
Hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come.
thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread,
And forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us.
lead us not into temptation,
But deliver us from evil. Thine is the kingdom, power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Good morning, honorable members. Honorable members, for starters, we have to correct this circumstance here on the front bench on the opposition side. We want no more than 4 members on any of the benches so that we get up the proper physical distancing. Right now, we have 6 members on the front bench. I would recommend that 2 members from the government side remove themselves so that the opposition caucus can remain together. And then I would like the opposition caucus to spread out to give us the required physical distancing. Honorable members, we still have too many on the front bench. We need 4 members on the front bench only. Honorable members, we still have 5 members on the front bench. We need 4, a maximum of 4. Thank you very much, honorable members. Communication from the Speaker. There will be no communication from the Speaker this morning. Introduction and swearing in of new members. Laying of documents by ministers. Statements and communications by ministers. Communications by the clerk. Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the Senate. Motion for leave of absence, leave to resign seat, and new writs. Presentations of petitions. Presentations of reports of committees. Adoption of reports of committees. First reading of bills. Second reading and committal of bills. Committee of the whole House. Third reading and passing of bills. Consideration of Senate amendments. Resolutions. The chair recognizes the honorable member for North Abaco.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise on no strength of my own, but on the strength of the God whom I trust and serve and love. It is in him that I breathe, move, and have the very essence of my being. I also rise on behalf of the people of North Abaco, and I rise, Mr. Speaker, in support of the resolution to extend the various emergency orders which are critical in the national effort to fight this COVID-19 pandemic. It is important that all Bahamians know what we are facing with the COVID-19 pandemic, Mr. Speaker. With unprecedented health, economic, and social dimensions, the coronavirus pandemic has caused the worst crisis in the modern history of our country. For us, the pandemic has raged since the spring. We sadly have had deaths. Our economy has been severely reduced due to the collapse of global travel. We continue to mourn those we have lost and to pray for the families who've lost loved ones. Many are tired of the pandemic, Mr. Speaker. We want to return to our former lives. We want to see our friends and families and colleagues like we used to. There is exhaustion with restrictions. This is understandable. We are social creatures as human beings. We derive meaning and happiness and support from close, intimate bonds with others. While this frustration is understandable, we as a people must also be wise. The pandemic is not close to being over. It will last well into next year. In fact, the world and the Bahamas may be currently heading into the worst period of the pandemic. In the Americas, in Europe, and parts of Asia, the outbreak is getting worse. Across Europe, new and greater restrictions, lockdowns, and curfews are being implemented. As Minister of Foreign Affairs, I see and hear regular reports on the state of the pandemic globally and on emergency measures taken by others to combat this deadly virus. Just last week, Mr. Speaker, whilst chairing the 50th session of the OAS General Assembly, I heard all 35 member states report on the catastrophic impact that COVID-19 is having in their country, in their economies, in the health, mental health as well, of our people. The week before, I listened to a similar report by Commonwealth foreign ministers detailing their country's struggles in the fight against this deadly pandemic. In many countries, Mr. Speaker, government and opposition parties are agreeing on emergency orders. In some countries, the official opposition is calling for even stricter measures than those proposed by the government. It's unfortunate and disappointing and irresponsible when some in our country fail to offer well-considered, intelligible ideas to help fight this pandemic. Mr. Speaker, months ago, global public health experts predicted the fall and winter months would be the worst of the pandemic. This is in part because as it gets colder in the northern hemisphere, people are more likely to remain indoors. The virus spreads easier in indoor settings where there is poor ventilation as compared to outside. Sadly, the predictions of the public health experts are being proven correct. COVID-19 cases are soaring across the northern hemisphere. Again, Record cases are being recorded in North America and in Europe. The global COVID-19 public health emergency, Mr. Speaker, is getting worse. Here in the Bahamas, while many of our family islands are doing better with low case numbers, we still face challenges in New Providence, which is our most populated island. Case numbers and hospitalizations remain elevated. The numbers are going up in a number of family islands because some from New Providence are helping to spread the virus on some of our islands. The pandemic emergency is not over in our country. The fight continues. Our founding fathers created the legal mechanism to deal with emergencies such as this one. These constitutionally approved emergency orders that we debate today simply provides the cabinet with the necessary tools to take the steps needed to mitigate the spread of this deadly COVID-19 virus. The orders are not meant to concentrate power in the hands of the competent authority, who in this instance happens to be the Prime Minister, but to give the cabinet an opportunity to manage this deadly COVID-19 pandemic based upon the preponderance of advice we receive from medical experts and others. As this pandemic is the worst emergency in our modern history, we invoked the proper legal powers to address this unprecedented emergency. And as the emergency continues, we are here today in Parliament to extend these emergency measures. The measures exist to empower the government to act quickly to save lives. We take the advice of public health professionals and create measures through these legal powers to help slow the spread of this deadly virus. Our objective as a government is to only put in place necessary restrictions. We do not like lockdowns. A lockdown is the last resort tool in our arsenal of measures. Members of the House and the public should be aware of the national and regional lockdowns currently taking place around the world, including in Europe, Mr. Speaker. You know, I watched the BBC this morning, and Mr. Speaker, I realized that the Bahamas is not the only country seeking to have restrictive measures to be able to mitigate the spread of this COVID-19 pandemic. United Kingdom and Wales, the Czech Republic, Israel, France, Spain, Italy, you name them, Mr. Speaker, they are acting similarly and even taking more draconian measures in some instances. Mr. Speaker, the emergency powers allow us to act quickly when we see data indicating a problem is emerging. This virus is very infectious. It is critical that the government has the ability to act quickly. Not having the ability to intervene would mean the virus would spread uncontrollably. This would mean that more people will get sick, and God forbid, Mr. Speaker, more people would die. Our friends opposite say they do not support the extension of the emergency powers. The least Bahamians should anticipate then is that they should have a viable working plan, an alternative that will mitigate the spread of the deadly coronavirus across our country. Our government is serious about leading. We simply don't have the luxury of Monday morning quarterbacking. We must lead now. And so we are not afraid to make the tough decisions to save lives. We also balance our public health policy making with the need to keep the economy going so more Bahamians can make a living. Restrictions are not popular, but in the context of a raging deadly virus, they are necessary to save Bahamian lives. Mr. Speaker, please indulge me to repeat that. Restrictions are not popular, but they are necessary to save Bahamian lives. As a people, we must harden our resolve. This pandemic is not close to ending. Like the rest of the world, we will continue to go through cycles of tightening up and loosening until we find that perfect mix that will cause us to be able to save lives, keep our people healthy, and put the engine of the economy back where we would like to see it in this country. When the virus numbers are high, in a part of our country, we must use the emergency measures to tighten up restrictions. When cases decrease, we loosen up and allow more openness. What we also do is try to apply measures to specific places. If there is a problem in New Providence, we tighten up there. If at the same time Crooked Island is virus-free, we maintain a loosened policy on that island. The ability to act to save lives comes from the emergency powers. Anyone who says these powers are not necessary in this crisis is being irresponsible. Anyone, Mr. Speaker, who say that these powers are not necessary in this time to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 and to save Bahamian lives are being irresponsible. And so I advise all Bahamians to continue following the public health advice. You've heard it many times. Avoid mass gatherings. Stay physically distant from others. Wear your masks properly over your nose and mouth when out. Wash or sanitize your hands regularly. Keep them away from your face. When interacting with people, it is better to do so outdoors at a distance with your mask in place. The last suggestion applies to when visiting friends and family. Keep your mask on, and it will be better for you to interact with them from a distance while on the outside. We must continue to be disciplined in the many months ahead. The more disciplined we are, the better outcome will be for the Bahamas and for our people. Mr. Speaker, with that, I support the extension of the emergency orders, the sole purpose of which is to protect and to save lives. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May God continue to bless and to guide the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Whereas, pursuant to Article 29(1) of the Constitution, the Governor General made a proclamation of emergency hereinafter the proclamation dated 17th day of March 2020, declaring that a state of public emergency exists in the Bahamas. Now, therefore, be it resolved that in this House, A, approves the continuance of the proclamation made on the 17th day of March 2020 until the 31st day of July 2020. The 17th day of March 2020 until the 31st day of July 2020 affirms the continuance and effect of the emergency powers COVID-19 regulations 2020 made on the 17th day of March 2020 until the 31st day of July 2020, affirms the continuance and effect of the emergency powers COVID-19.
Honorable member, I think you should be reading from page 14
Okay.
through 16.
Let's see if we can get this one right. Now, therefore, be it resolved. Can we start again at the beginning? Now, therefore, be it resolved that this House approves the continuation of the second proclamation made on the 29th day of June 2020 until the 30th day of November 2020. Affirms the continuance in effect of the emergency powers COVID-19 pandemic regulations 2020 made on the 29th day of June 2020 until the 30th day of November 2020. Affirms the continuance in effect of the emergency powers COVID pandemic number 8 order 2020 made on the 9th day of October 2020 until the 30th day of November 2020. Affirms the continuance in effect of the emergency powers COVID-19 pandemic special provisions order 2020 made on the 30th day of June 2020 until the 30th day of November 2020, and affirms the continuance in effect of the emergency powers COVID-19 pandemic extension of Section 7(1) in the Local Government Act, Chapter 37, Order 2020, made on the 31st day of August 2020 until the 30th day of November 2020. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Is there a seconder? The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Golden Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the wonderful people of the Golden Gates constituency, and I thank each of them for the honor and privilege they have afforded me to represent their best interests in this honorable chamber, and I thank the Almighty God. I rise, sir, to second the resolution. Mr. Speaker, these are perilous times. These are dangerous times. These are times of fear, uncertainty, and anxiety in the midst of a national crisis. It affects each and every one of us, sir, in some way or the other, having no regard to party affiliation, station in life, place of abode, influence, connection, power, or wealth. We are at a crossroads. The challenges of the crossroads, and what lies beyond it is daunting. But I know this, Mr. Speaker, I know this. We as a people are equal to them. All of us standing together at the crossroads as one people, working together in unity of purpose and in our sure efforts to defeat COVID-19 by the grace and mercy of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. Mr. Speaker, the feelings and apprehensions of our people are not without cause for real, true, and justifiable concern. Our people know just how perilous and dangerous these times are. Mr. Speaker, they live it every day, God sends. It hurts us all that we have lost 132 of our brothers and sisters to this virus. Family members, friends, neighbors, and co-workers, some we have known for a very long time. It hurts us that our loved ones passed away and we could not be with them in their final hours. It hurts us. It hurts us that our ability to grieve in our own way, having lost a loved one, has been severely hampered by the virus. It hurts us that we have had family members in the hospital, some in the ICU, in serious condition, but our ability to visit them has been limited by the virus. It hurts us that we have family, friends, neighbors, and co-workers who are today, as we speak, hospitalized today, right now, or have recently been discharged. We all know people, family and friends, right now, with the hope and prayers for better tomorrows. It hurts us that so many have been laid off since March, especially our brothers and sisters in the tourism industry. It hurts us. Hotel workers, taxi cab drivers, tour drivers, airline workers, straw vendors, hair braiders, jet ski and other water sports operators, restaurant employees, vendors at forts, beaches, and other sites, and the many persons who work at or operate other businesses that are not tourism related. It hurts us, Mr. Speaker, that we have had to rely on so much assistance. That hurts us. Make no mistake, Mr. Speaker, it is much appreciated. We are most grateful. But, Mr. Speaker, it is not our way. It hurts when it is difficult to put food on the table, to feed your children. Mr. Speaker, that hurts to no end when there's no food for the children. It hurts when you cannot make the rent and you know it is not long before the landlord gives you the sad news about conviction. eviction. Pardon me. About eviction. It hurts when you cannot pay electricity, the water, or other utilities, not knowing when they will be disconnected. It hurts when there's no cooking gas in the tank and you have no means of obtaining any. And more so, when you have no means of even obtaining a canister of gas. It hurts when your child is educated via the internet and you do not have an electronic device for them to benefit from online classes. It hurts when you would like to worship in the house of the Lord, in some cases, having not done so since March or April, and to share in the fellowship of that experience. It hurts, Mr. Speaker, when you cannot visit your family members or friends, especially a parent or a grandparent, ailing before the virus. Ailing before the virus. Your good, dear, and loving grandparent. And more so, if their condition may have deteriorated due to the virus. It hurts when major accomplishments in the family or special anniversaries cannot be celebrated with loved ones and friends together in person. That hurts. It hurts, Mr. Speaker, when you cannot even hug, warmly embrace, or even shake the hand of a loved one or a good friend. Mr. Speaker, these have been very sad, unfortunate, and life-altering experiences in the worst possible way for our people for 7 months now, sir, due to COVID-19. This is often called, and I quote, the new normal. But, sir, there is not much that is normal about it. Truly, we are living through a near complete absence of what we would describe as normal. It is, though, quote, a new reality, and it is one for all of us. It is one that we are unaccustomed to, unfamiliar with, and indeed foreign to us, but one that we are forced to confront head on, and one that we will defeat. We will defeat it by the grace of God. Mr. Speaker, Scripture tells us in the book of Isaiah, chapter 40, verse 31, one we are perhaps all familiar with, and I quote, "But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint." Close quote. Mr. Speaker, I say to my brothers and sisters, wherever they may be, at this moment, right now, wherever you are, during these times, whether you're listening or you're watching these proceedings, from Inagua in the south to the Abacos in the north, I say to my brothers and sisters, I say to you, never, never, ever lose your hope. Never, never, ever lose heart. And never, never, ever become faint. But know always that our God will deliver you. Mr. Speaker, I say to my brothers and sisters throughout the length and breadth of our beloved country, let no one rob you of your hope. Let no one deprive you of your hope. And let no one separate you from your hope. For what do we have? And how do we live daily without hope in our hearts and the goodwill towards each other? What do we have, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, we should always be cautious and guarded when we hear what appears to be spreaders of dread, of discord, of disunity and dissension, especially what we as a people are going through at this time, and indeed a worldwide health crisis. as the honorable member just said a moment ago. Mr. Speaker, let me say frankly, in my view, the honorable member for Cat Island, Rumkins, and Salvador, the leader of the official opposition, was not very helpful, to say the least, and was indeed extremely reckless and highly irresponsible when he referred to new restrictions announced in this chamber on the 7th of this month by the honorable member for Kalani and Prime Minister, the most honorable Hubert A. Minnis. As reported in Nassau Guardian, Hubert A. Minnis, as reported in Nassau Guardian, and I quote, I think it is an act of punishment, close quote. And Mr. Speaker, here it is here, the Nassau Guardian, Thursday, the 8th of October. The comments were made the prior day on the 7th, and below the fold, Davis, new restrictions meant to punish Bahamians. Further, there's a specific quote, and I read here, I think it's an act of punishment, close quote. Mr. Speaker, clearly, we do not always agree, but I respect the honorable member. However, in my view, that was not his finest hour. In fact, far from it. In the midst of a national crisis, the one thing that I presume we can all agree on is that we need to control the spread of the virus, given the high infection. And that's the one thing all of us here can agree on. All of us. I don't think there's any disagreement there, sir. The honorable member seems to suggest that the Prime Minister, the honorable member for Bamboo Town, the Minister of Health, the Cabinet, the government parliamentarians, and the health officials leading the fight against the virus, that all of them wish or desire any new restrictions or curfews. Nothing could be further from the truth. They don't desire any of those things, Mr. Speaker. And the honorable member said that a moment ago. Mr. Speaker, equally important, sir, is the notion that the honorable member effectively suggested or inferred that other countries around the world were punishing their citizens, having implemented some of the very same restrictions in the face of surging viral infections in order to control the spread. The honorable member said that just now too. We're not the only ones in this situation. This is the world over. Many countries. Imagine how incredible it is to effectively suggest or infer that many US governors and mayors are punishing their citizens because they implement new restrictions to curb the surge in the viral infections. Imagine, because they impose new and implement new restrictions, that's the punishment? So, United Kingdom too. It also implemented new restrictions in some areas to reduce the spread and get the virus under control. It seems to me that the honorable member is also suggesting that the UK citizens are being punished by their government. And Mr. Speaker, many countries around the world, others in Europe, Asia, Africa, North America, South Central America, and the Caribbean, are all implementing new restrictions, given the ferocious second surge being experienced around the globe, sir. This is not just the Bahamas. This is around the world. It seems to me that the honorable member is suggesting or inferring that all of these countries around the world that have implemented new restrictions are punishing their citizens. That is stunning, it's outrageous, it's unthinkable, beyond belief. Simply, in my view, and respectfully, it makes no sense. Mr. Speaker, moreover, the statement by the honorable member, in my view, is not very helpful at all, and indeed counterproductive when a great and sustained effort is being made by the health professionals and others to get persons on board. That's what the honorable member just spoke to. Trying to get people on board with the protocols, with following the restrictions when we clearly face that challenge. When we clearly face that challenge, Mr. Speaker, we're facing that challenge. It does not take much for people to conclude that if they think they are being punished unfairly, follow this. It does not take much for people to conclude that if they think they are being punished unfairly, then they might be less inclined, Mr. Speaker, to adhere to the restrictions, especially if such a suggestion comes from the leader of the official opposition. This is extremely reckless and highly irresponsible, in my view, sir. Mr. Speaker, one might have thought the honorable member, being a responsible leader of the official opposition, and having regard to his recent experience and that of many behemoths with the virus, he would have expressed a more cautionary message to our brothers and sisters. That is to wear a mask, wash or sanitize hands regularly throughout the day, physically distant, and not gather, especially headed into what was then a 3-day holiday weekend. However, Mr. Speaker, he chose not to do that. He chose instead to make the matter of the new restrictions announced by the Prime Minister purely political in these perilous times. Indeed, a national crisis, one experienced around the world. One would have thought his comments, too, might have been to unify us, Mr. Speaker. He thought his comments would have been to unify us and not divide us as a people. Not divide us as a people, Mr. Speaker, on the issue of our collective fight. Working together, fighting against the virus, Mr. Speaker. One would have thought that. Also, sir, the Honorable Member Cat Island, Rumkins, and Salvador, in my view, ought to have made comments, sir, to uplift us, all of us as a people, to encourage us as a people, and inspire us as a people in the throes of a national medical crisis, rather than suggest or infer that we perceive ourselves as victims being punished. Mr. Speaker, I am reminded of a quote by the U.S. President John F. Kennedy when he said, and I quote, "In a time of domestic crisis, men of goodwill," and I would add, women, "and generosity should be able to unite, regardless of party or politics." In a time of domestic crisis, men of goodwill, and I would add women, and generosity should be able to unite regardless of party or politics. Close quote. Mr. Speaker, there is no question that we are literally right now, in this moment, in the throes of a ferocious second surge of COVID-19, which many experts advise is worse than the first, more virulent and even mutating. Eckhart Tolle, a spiritual teacher and author, is quoted saying, Mr. Speaker, and these words are so timely, and I quote from Eckhart Tolle, spiritual teacher and author: "When faced with a radical crisis, when the old way of being in the world, of interacting with each other, and with the realm of nature doesn't work anymore, when survival is threatened by seemingly insurmountable problems, survival, or individual life forms or species will either die or become extinct, or, Mr. Speaker, or rise above the limitations of its condition through an evolutionary leap." Mr. Speaker, the quote by Eckhart Tolle could not speak more to our current perilous and dangerous experience combined with the effects of Hurricane Dorian just a year ago. Could not speak more to it. In fact, this pandemic is recognized the world over as a once-in-a-100-year experience. In his quote, he speaks to, quote, "survival is threatened by seemingly insurmountable problems. An individual life form or species will either die or become extinct or rise above the limitation of its condition to an evolutionary leap." Mr. Speaker, that is exactly where we are. That's exactly where we are. We are in the process of an evolutionary leap by learning, sir, to live with COVID-19. That's an evolutionary leap. All of us together learning to live with COVID-19. And it's not easy. Far from it. In this evolutionary leap, this new reality that we are experiencing daily, how we interact with each other is central and critical as it plays a direct role in the spread of the COVID-19 infection. Hence, Mr. Speaker, I humbly remind our brothers and sisters, all of us, indeed, to do our best to follow the health protocols, which we know well. Wear masks, wash and sanitize hands regularly, physically distance, and do not gather. While the confirmed cases of the virus have been ferociously surging recently, the reality is that our healthcare professionals have been doing a fine, exemplary job. And as the honorable member for Cat Island, Rumkins and Salvador said, as he was about to leave Nassau for treatment abroad, the treatment he received was quote unquote excellent. Was excellent. And he's right. They're doing an excellent job. They're doing an excellent job. We are very proud of them and the critical work they are doing. A Herculean job, a yeoman's work. They are indeed among the best in the world, Mr. Speaker. Our health professionals. They're amongst the best in the world. Dr. Sands, the Honorable Member for Elizabeth, will tell you that. They're amongst the best in the world. They are indeed among the best in the world. We are so very fortunate to have such talented Bahamian medical professionals. We are so very fortunate. Our people are talented. Make no mistake about it. And, Mr. Speaker, the numbers bear that out. The numbers bear that out. So let's examine all the numbers, not just the rising confirmed cases. We know them well. We all very familiar with the rising confirmed case numbers. We know them, for the most part. Mr. Speaker, in fact, when you examine all the numbers, the picture that is painted is one of good progress. Good progress, Mr. Speaker, being on the right track and going in the right direction. Regard to the evolutionary leap and new reality that has been forced upon us. Mr. Speaker, it's been forced upon us. It's been visited upon us, not of our own doing. It's been forced upon us, Mr. Speaker. But we are making good progress. We're on the right track, and we're moving in the right direction. Mr. Speaker, on the 1st of July 2020, at the end of the first surge, the numbers were as shown on this dashboard. Mr. Speaker, the dashboard here, as you can see, 1st of July 2020, confirmed cases 104, recovered cases 89, active cases 4, hospitalization 0, total tests completed. Where are we now? Yeah. Where are you now? Oh, you're right. Yeah, thank you, right. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's when you're too close. 2,424. Now, Mr. Speaker, that the 89 of the recovered, of the confirmed cases, that 89 represents 85.58%. So on July 1st, Mr. Speaker, 85.58% of the 104 confirmed cases had recovered. Of the active cases, there were only 3.85. Of the deaths, which were 11, of the 104, that represented 10.57%, Mr. Speaker. Very sadly, 11 represented 10.57% of the 104. Hospitalization, as you can see, was 0. Wonderful. A wonderful thing. No one hospitalized. Tests completed was 2,424, which incidentally works out to about slightly over half of 1% of our population of about 390,000. Mr. Speaker, so we will now examine the dashboard. For the 23rd of September, 2020, 23rd September 2020, Mr. Speaker, and you will see that the confirmed cases are 3,618. The recovered cases are 1,915. The active cases is 1,594. You will find that the hospitalizations are 89. You will also find that the tests completed, down the bottom right corner here, 18,263. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the recovered cases were at 52.93%. Mr. Speaker, The active cases were 44.05. These are all demonstrate that there was a spike, clearly. Deaths were now at 80. However, I would note, Mr. Speaker, that was 80. That's 80 out of 3,618. The rate of the mortality, Mr. Speaker, had dropped to 2.21%. We just looked at July 1st. It was 10.57. That rate had dropped to 2.21%. That speaks to the wonderful job that our healthcare professionals have been doing. That's what I say. The numbers bear that out. Our people in healthcare, in the medical field, have been doing more than an exceptional job. And the numbers bear it out. It is of concern, naturally, that hospitalizations had risen to 89%, which is 2.46% of the confirmed cases of 3,618. A test completed, as you saw, and you can see now, 18,263. Mr. Speaker, that's 7.53 times more than we had on July 1st. 7.5 times more was the testing on the 23rd, on the 23rd of September. Mr. Speaker, so we'll now examine the dashboard for the 24th of October, just this past Saturday, a little more than 3.5 months since July. This one is a little more complex, Mr. Speaker, because as we know, the ministry went the ministry made a great effort to ensure that they give the Bahamian people as much information as possible.
Can you face the microphone when you're speaking?
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, thank you. As I said, there's a little more work to do here, Mr. Speaker, because in the ministry's effort to give the Bahamian people more information, it's resulted in like a 3-page dashboard. And they've moved away from the 1-page dashboard we have seen just now. And this was designed to give the Bahamian people far more information and than had been provided previously. And if we look here, just so that we can go through the numbers, the confirmed cases, this is 24 October 2020. The confirmed cases, the total here, 6,410. That's the confirmed cases. 6,410. Clearly and undeniably, we have a ferocious surge. We do. That's what we have. Now, and then, as we have here, the active cases. Active cases, 3,948. 3,948, Mr. Speaker. Those are the active cases. Mr. Speaker, sorry, pardon me. That's recovered cases. I beg your pardon, Mr. Speaker. The recovered cases are 3,948. Recovered cases, active, are 2,290. I beg your pardon. 2,290 active. Total recovered, 3,948. I beg your pardon, sir. Give me the other one. Oh, while I'm here on this, Mr. Speaker, and this one, while I'm here on this one, hospitalizations is also on this chart, 110. Hospitalizations 110. Mr. Speaker, let me see on the chart for a moment, please. On this chart, Mr. Speaker, you will notice that death at the top is 132. The death at the top is 132. That's the total death. That's as of Saturday. Most sad, most unfortunate stuff. These numbers clearly show that while there has been a ferocious second surge since July 1st, the key indicators, especially recovered cases, are rising. The number of persons who have recovered is rising, Mr. Speaker. That number is rising. It speaks to the good job our professionals in the medical field are doing. As of Saturday past, that was up to 62%. And clearly increasing almost every day. Every day that number is increasing. It is truly sad and regrettable that most unfortunate that 132 of our brothers and sisters have as of Saturday past. They've lost their lives, 132, Mr. Speaker. Meanwhile, on the 1st of July 2020, our total number of lost souls was 11. Any soul that is lost is of deep concern to all of us. But the numbers reflect that as of the 1st of July, as you said earlier, the rate of mortality was 10.57. As of Saturday, sir, it has now been reduced to 2.06. 2.06. Mr. Speaker, we note that hospitalizations, as we said, on the 23rd of September was 2.46 of the confirmed cases. And Saturday past, it was 1.72 of the same, Mr. Speaker, all going in the right direction. Active cases on the 23rd of September was 44.05. Saturday past, it was 35.73, also going in the right direction. Mr. Speaker, tests completed, as we saw, is now 14 times the test on the 1st of July. Mr. Speaker, if I may have a couple more minutes, please, I'll try to wrap up.
Oh,
I'll move on from the remaining statistics. I'll just go to the end, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable
I
Member,
just
you have 2
have
minutes.
a tad bit, sir.
You have 2 minutes?
Yes, sir. Thank you. So, Mr. Speaker, let me say the numbers clearly show that we're making good progress. We're on the right track. We're going in the right direction. And, Mr. Speaker, we all ought to be proud of our health and medical professionals. It is because of them and the good job they're doing. They don't control the confirmed cases number. They don't. We do. That's why we have to wear these. The Prime Minister called them Scud missile. We got to wear Scud missile. That's what we do to help them. Mr. Speaker, we are in a war against COVID-19, as the Prime Minister rightly said months ago. We were then, and we are now. No army goes to war with all of their arsenal available to them, without all their arsenal available to them. Imagine a country going to war, sending their soldiers in the battle without guns. Or if they go with guns, not go without ammunition. And imagine going into that same war, but leaving the tanks at base. Or, for that matter, leaving the rocket-propelled grenades, or RPGs, or bazookas, as we call them. We are in a war, and we need the emergency orders in our arsenal. We need them in our arsenal, sir, to fight COVID-19. That is the enemy. It's without, not within. It is not us. It's COVID-19. It makes little sense, Mr. Speaker, to leave it, the emergency orders, on the floor of the House of Assembly. Makes no sense. Mr. Speaker, I fully and wholeheartedly support this resolution. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Members, it has been moved and seconded that the following resolution be agreed. Whereas, pursuant to Article 29, subsection 1 of the Constitution, the Governor General may make a proclamation of emergency declaring that a state of emergency for the purposes of that article exists in the Bahamas. And whereas the World Health Organization declared a global pandemic of COVID-19, which seriously threatened the public health of the Bahamas. Now, therefore, be it resolved that this House, A, approves the continuance of the second proclamation made on the 29th day of June 2020 until the 30th day of November 2020. B, affirms the continuance in effect of the Emergency Powers COVID-19 Pandemic Regulation 2020 made on the 29th day of June 2020 until the 30th day of November 2020. C, affirms the continuance in effect of the Emergency Powers COVID-19 Pandemic Number 8 Order 2020 made on the 9th day of October 2020 until the 30th day of November 2020. D, affirms the continuance in effect of the Emergency Powers COVID-19 Pandemic Special Provisions Order 2020 made on the 30th day of June 2020 until the 30th day of November 2020. And E, affirms the continuance in effect of the Emergency Powers COVID-19 Pandemic extension of Section 7, Subsection 1 of the Local Government Act, Chapter 37, Order 2020, made on the 31st day of August 2020. until the 30th day of November 2020. As many? The chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I wish to say thanks to my constituents of Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador, letting them know that I'm so proud in the manner in which they have been adhering to the protocols to keep our residents safe, and joining in this fight, which we have been successful with in that constituency against this invisible enemy. You know, it's very interesting. I sat and listened to the member from Golden Gates, and I'm happy that he said that it was what he spoke about was his view. His view when I spoke about punishment. I'll say some more about that when I get into my more substantive contribution. But if he doesn't believe what I had to say about punishment, I invite him to speak to the coconut vendors who's trying to make a living at this time and ask them what they think. I asked him to speak to that man who went to get water from the pump, to go and clean the bathroom of his grandfather. Ask him. No, ask that gentleman whose mother was ill, was called to go and see her. Ask him. Ask them what they think about what is going on. Ask them if they don't feel that they are being punished. And you speak about progress. Quite frankly, your contribution undermines that concept of progress. Have we progressed when in July we had 104 cases? July 1st, there were 104 confirmed cases. And the latest dashboard, which you just pointed out, has 6,400 plus cases. Is that progress? In the same dashboard of July 1st, 2020, speaks to us having 11 deaths. We now have 132 deaths from the 1st of July to date, with 26 of those deaths still not classified. Is that progress? I ask the Bahamian people. When you talk about unity, you know, unity suggests, the concept of unity speaks to the fact that there's one, has to be more than one. And unity suggests also a willingness to be unified. You know, it's like a marriage. No one's going to marry to you unless they consent. So in unity, you have to have consent of both parties. Find out who is the unwilling party in the unity for which you call for today. That's all I ask. Mr. Speaker, we do not support an extension of this emergency order. We do not support it. Bahamians are suffering. We are in a health crisis. We are in an economic crisis. And we are suffering from a leadership crisis. That too, with lack of trust in this government spreading faster than this terrible virus. And now we have an administrative crisis to contend with as well. Mr. Speaker, COVID case counts are low and stable in many nations, including many of our regional neighbors. Yet, here, cases continue to grow. Hundreds more every week. In fact, every few days, the Bahamas records more new COVID cases than Barbados has recorded in total, since the pandemic began in March. The government's COVID policies are clearly a failure. The government have imposed harsh restrictions on the people of this
Honorable Member
country.
for Cat Island. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Golden Gate on a point of order.
Yes, Mr. Point of Order. The honorable member is misleading this House and the Damon people. He just said that the government's plans are a failure. That's a statement of fact. That's a statement of fact, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, how can he say that the government's plans and what the government's doing is in fact a failure? Mr. Speaker, that's very misleading. I just demonstrated how great progress is being made, in spite of the high numbers.
Mr.
Then he
Speaker.
comes back and he says that's a statement of fact.
Speaker.
Now, Mr. Speaker, if the honorable, may I finish, Mr. Speaker? I won't be long. If the honorable member said that is his opinion, that is different, Mr. Speaker, but he's making a statement of fact for the Bahamian people to believe that it is a fact. But if the honorable member would preface his comment by the statement that it is his view, or his view, that would be different, sir.
I thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Member for Cat Island, Ron Keynes in Salvador.
Mr. Speaker, I pointed to the dashboard itself. The dashboard itself is the fact upon which I base that fact that the government's COVID policies are a failure. They speak for itself.
Honorable Member.
That's what I said today. And if it is that you want, if they don't believe that's my opinion, that is my opinion, right? And that is fact, right? The government have impressed the government.
Honorable Member for Cat Island.
Yes.
Obviously, particularly with statistics.
It is my view that it is a policy, is a failure, and that view is founded on the fact. It's founded on the fact that on July 1st, we had 104 confirmed cases, and the last cases that we have today, less than 3 months later, it amounts to 6,400. If that's not fact upon which you can base failure, then tell me what else can. They have imposed harsh restrictions, Mr. Speaker, on the people of this country. They have taken a wrecking ball to our local economy. At the same time, the government have utterly failed to contain the virus. Yet, the so-called competent authority wants to continue to exercise broad, sweeping powers over Bahamians with no parliamentary oversight. No self-respecting parliamentarian.
The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for North Abaco.
It's totally incorrect for the member to suggest that there's no oversight of this order. Because that's the very reason why we're here today debating this resolution. This debate provides Parliament with the oversight of the emergency order. And so it's incorrect for him to state that.
I wonder if the members appreciate the role of Parliament. If you're going to adjourn Parliament, right, for weeks, during the course of which weeks you are introducing new orders, new measures, and new restrictions without any input from us in here. That's not parliamentary oversight, Mr. Speaker. That is not parliamentary insight. It cannot be when they think it is. It should be a constant overview of what they're going. And that's why I grounded in parliamentary oversight. Mr. Speaker, and I say no self-respecting parliamentarian
Honorable
should
member
agree
for
to this.
Island. The chair recognizes honorable member.
The honorable member is misleading this parliament.
On a point of order.
He's misleading this parliament. It is one thing, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable
It is,
member.
Mr. Speaker, I will tell him. If it's one thing, Mr. Speaker, to say, it is one thing to say, to speak to the quality of the process and the parliamentary involvement. The quality. But to say that there's none is an entirely different matter, Mr. Speaker. That's an entirely different matter. The quality, he may have an issue with. And guess what? We probably disagree with him. But to say there's none is an entirely different matter. And he ought to withdraw that, sir.
If you examine the quality of the oversight to which they allude and that they say exists, what I say, that amounts to no parliamentary oversight, in my view. It amounts to no parliamentary oversight. So even if you go into the qualitative aspect of the oversight, it does not amount to parliamentary oversight. And no self-respecting parliamentarian should agree to this. Why should we surrender our constitutional prerogative to scrutinize, debate, and improve the rules governing our people, especially when some of our most important freedoms are curtailed by these rules? Mr. Speaker, the emergency orders were intended to be a short-term, a way to give the government the flexibility to manage an urgent public health crisis. That's what it's for, right? You will recall, Mr. Speaker, that we in the Progressive Party supported the initial state of emergency. We supported it because we thought it was necessary. But they have squandered the period. Yet, here we are, more than 220 days later, and we still have, when it comes to this pandemic, a one-man rule. No one can argue seriously that our Constitution envisioned a competent authority of one man holding himself beyond accountability.
Honorable member for Cat Island. The chair recognizes the honorable member for North Abaco on a point of order.
Clearly misleading this parliament. The competent authority represents the face of the cabinet. The cabinet makes decisions at the executive level as to what we should do in these instances of emergency. So he should withdraw that
No,
comment.
that's not a new twist.
He should withdraw that
That's always
comment.
been fair. That's the Mama Kalani said.
Honorable
And I,
member.
and I will not go into the conversations I've had with the competent authority.
Honorable member.
That's a new twist. And Mr. Speaker,
Honorable member.
Mr. Speaker, you will recall.
Honorable member for
Yes.
Cat Island, Ramkin Saburo. Honorable members, I'm trying to resolve this issue. The member for North Abaco has raised an issue with the statement that you made with respect to one-man rule. Are you able to substantiate that claim?
Speaker, no, it's not a question about him, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the question will arise because, Mr. Speaker, if you go back to the initial, when we were supporting the emergency orders, I warned the Prime Minister about arrogating the competent authority unto himself. And he said it'll be him and him alone. That's what he said in here.
Honorable member. Honorable member. Honorable member. Honorable member.
Yes.
I am afraid I cannot allow you to put that statement on the record in the absence of the member, particularly since I personally don't recall that statement. I may not have been in the chair.
Okay, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member. Honorable member.
Mr. Speaker, I withdraw that statement. But what I do say is I stood up in this parliament and I warned not once, but on a couple of occasions, the member for Kalani for arrogating unto himself the role of the competent authority. And he has been acting as such. Right? So, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, we are now hearing, right?
He is the competent authority. It is what it is.
See,
It is what it is.
See, Mr. Speaker, we could only guess whom the competent authority consults, if he consults anyone, right? He says, and for that matter, we want to appreciate and understand the advice and or the data that he relies upon to justify, for example, a 7 p.m. curfew as opposed, for example, a 10 p.m. curfew. Where is the proof? Where is the proof that we can lock down are effective
Honorable member,
and that the benefits
honorable
outweigh
member
the
for Cat
harm?
Island. Honorable member for Golden Gates, are you on a point of order?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
The chair
Again,
recognizes
yes,
the honorable member for Golden Gates on a
Mr.
point of
Speaker,
order.
again, misleading this House and the Bain people. The honorable member just said that the member for Kalani makes these decisions himself. Nothing could be further from the truth, Mr. Speaker. The member for Kalani has come here. We all heard him on numerous occasions say he has always, and the cabinet has always relied on the advice of the medical and health professionals. That is what he's always said. Always said, Mr. Speaker. And he comes here and he tells the Bayman people the serious misleading of them. That's what he does. And then the honorable member's not even here in this chamber. He's not even here. But yet still he comes in and says, this is what he said. He's also said, if that's what he said, according to him, one thing for sure, he has also said that these decisions have been made by the cabinet on the advice at all times of the medical and health professionals. Thank you, sir.
Hence the question today. Right? I said it's questionable from whom he gets his advice. That's what I said. I didn't say what he said or did not say. I say that it's questionable. And I now say, and what I said, Mr. Speaker, and I asked the question, and I said, where is, so he gets his advice. So I say, where is the data, therefore, that informs the advice that justifies a 7 p.m. curfew as opposed to a 10 p.m. curfew? Where is the proof, the data or advice, right, that confirms that weekend lockdowns are effective and that the benefits outweigh the harms? Where is it? Lay that down. Those are the questions, right? And that's the question, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, are we...
Honorable member,
Mr. Speaker,
honorable member, are you on a point of order? Golden Gates, on a point of order?
Yes, sir. Yes, again, misleading, Mr. Speaker, because we know for a fact that they did not show up to the meeting. Mr. Speaker, they didn't show up to the
Honorable
meeting.
member, let me...
How can you ask for the information and where's the basis of the information when you invited to the meeting to give you that same information and you do not attend?
Honorable members.
How could you, Mr.
Honorable
Speaker?
members, We have
Could
to
you?
maintain certain decorum and honorable members.
I understand the truth hurts, you know. And when answers cannot be forthcoming, this tactic of the tactic is being engaged. But Mr. Speaker, I asked the questions. He is confirming that the Prime Minister acts on advice and medical advice. So all I say was share it with us. And tell us, and confirm with us, right? So share it with us, right? Share it with us, right? Show it to us, right? Mr. Speaker, we ask as well how many businesses have closed their doors due to these restrictions, even as they fail to stop transmission of the virus. Where is the scientific evidence that supports closing beaches to Bahamians when the virus is mainly transmitted inside, not outside, when people are increasingly crowded into homes, when everyone is pushed to their limit and needs a break? He says, as they are now confirming, that he's following science. We say, show us the science. Mr. Speaker, these matters is what we want to have a debate about here in Parliament. Let the man who's making these decisions attempt to justify them before the people and their representatives. Notice that the same man, he avoids the opportunities to be questioned. He chooses national addresses instead of press conferences or virtual town halls so he doesn't have to face the press or the people. He wants his way, even if that way is failing. They are my views. That's my views from my observations and what I'm seeing happening, Mr. Speaker. The tragedy, Mr. Speaker, the tragedy is, the truth hurts. So I understand. So keeps crying.
Honorable members.
This is tragedy. The tragedy is, Mr. Speaker, that our country has become a case study for how not to manage a public health crisis. We continue to rank at the bottom of the countries globally when it comes to our country's response and management of COVID. I said, I hope you recollect, right? In July, Mr. Speaker, our borders were opened without the resources in place to stop any new cases of the virus from proliferating, as the member has demonstrated in producing the dashboards. He has demonstrated. And thus a few cases, 104, turned into more than 6,000 and counting. This was not inevitable. It did not have to be this bad. This is what government failure looks like. The government has been...
Honorable member for Cat Island, Rumkey and Salvador.
The plan is coming.
Honorable member for Cat Island. The chair recognizes the honorable member for West Grand Bahama and
The member
Bimini.
for Cat Island continues to speak about the government's failure here in the Bahamas. My question to the member of parliament is, first and foremost, you continue to mislead this parliament. The United States, the UK, other countries world over, France, have also put in place. The entire world, Mr. Speaker, have challenges with regards to the virus. Are they also failures? If that is the case, Mr. Speaker, he might as well just say the whole globe has failed.
Speaker, let me just say, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members.
The entire world has just failed.
See, the member for West Grand Bahama and Bimini has just fallen into the narrative of the government.
There's no narrative.
They have become expert at pointing at other countries that are failing to contain the virus. Yet, there are many countries, including many developing nations, who are succeeding. Many are succeeding, even in this region. I pointed to Barbados. I can point to others. Turks and Caicos, Haiti. Right? I go down the line. Yes, they are succeeding, right? A strong leader would look to the successful nations, not to the nations that's failing, and be determined to make sure our country was among them. It's infuriating to see this government signal defeat when so much is at stake. Looking at the failing nations, let's look at those who are successful. Look at what Barbados is doing. Look at what Jamaica has done. Look at those. We need leadership, Mr. Speaker, not surrender. That's what we need.
Honorable members,
7 months in. 7 months in. He is still
Cat
asking.
Island, Rumkey and Salvador. The honorable member is on the feet again.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise.
Honorable member for
Point.
Golden Gates. On a point of order.
Yes, sir. Misleading, Mrs.
Honorable members.
Mr. Speaker, the honorable member, Mr. Speaker, the honorable member, for the second time since he stood, has referred to Barbados. But the reality of it, Mr. Speaker, and the honorable member knows, they're not testing the way we're testing. They're not testing the numbers we are testing. And Mr. Speaker, it is a given, the more you test, the more numbers you will have. The more positives you will have, the more you test.
Thank you. Honorable member for Elizabeth, are you on a point of order?
Another point of order. Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask the honorable member for Golden Gate to retract his last statement. Barbados tests more cases per million than the Bahamas, and they have done so consistently. So please, the honorable member has misspoke. I'm sure it was an error on his part. He's entitled to that. But if he would withdraw that statement, because I think we need to speak facts in this honorable place.
Thank you, honorable members.
I am speaking facts. And I do know truth hurts. And I'll continue. And as I continue, I expect more As the pain reaches you, I expect you to wince and say something, right? So what I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, we need to look at what successful nations are doing, right? I could come back to the statement you made about testing, right? All right? As a strong leader will look to the successful nations, right? 7 months in, we're still asking for the continued ability to suspend the constitutional rights of Bahamian people, even though we see no plan to contain COVID. Lockdowns are not a plan. Lockdowns are evidence of an ongoing failure to find and isolate the virus to stop the virus from transmitting. The competent authority, I will tell you, the competent authority is not competent. I'm moved to say that he's not even interested. Right? I am moved to say that. I am moved to say that. He sends out other people to defend his policies. He has clearly run out of ideas, it appears. Speaker, it is agonizing to me. It is agonizing to me to see other countries protect their citizens while here the virus spreads and Bahamians are under siege. Our healthcare system is near collapse. Our doctors and nurses are exhausted and need reinforcements. More than 7 months into the crisis, the government still has not set up adequate protocols to keep non-COVID patients at PMH safe from the virus. In the meantime, the Bahamas is behind countries like Jamaica and Trinidad in securing therapeutic medicines for COVID patients. Without a plan to stop COVID, there can be no real economic recovery. Nations will continue to warn their citizens to stay away. Local businesses will continue to buckle under the pressure. Bahamians need jobs, not an adequate food distribution system. Bahamians need a government that supports them instead of blaming and punishing them. I cannot understand how this government justifies, for example, turning off water and electricity at a time like this. It's as if they have given up on defeating the virus and are instead trying to defeat the Bahamian people. Enough, Mr. Speaker, it's really enough. It's long past time to change course. Mr. Speaker, the Progressive has a 10-point action plan to contain COVID so that we can protect Bahamians and begin our economic recovery. The Bahamas can be a success story. We need widespread testing so we can find the virus, help people get treatment, trace their contacts, and break transmission chains. We need to break transmission chains. We need to knock down barriers to testing. We need to make testing free because your ability to protect yourself and your family from COVID shouldn't depend on your income. Your wealth should not determine your health. Mr. Speaker, as I said, we have put out an action plan. And if you want to see it, just go to covidactionplan.org. It is there. Right? Let's make testing free. It will come back later on the table for you. I'll bring it and lay it on the table for you. We'll do that. Let's make testing free for any Bahamians who may have been exposed to the virus. Let's hire and train more contact tracers.
Honorable members.
I am now speaking to the plan. Let's make testing free for any Bahamians who may have been exposed to the virus. 1, let's hire and train more contact tracers. 2, let's help people who test positive isolate themselves from others while they are infectious. Let's make sure that therapeutic treatments are available to Bahamians. Let's take better care of the doctors and nurses who are taking care of us. Let's give Bahamians the information they need to protect themselves and their families. Let's make our homes.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Golden Gates. On a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, I hear the honorable member talking about You're misleading you're misleading.
Honorable
He's
member,
misleading.
are you on a point of order?
Yes, misleading. The member is misleading. The member is misleading the speaker. Mr. Speaker, the honorable member just indicated, as he said, as a mantra about the need for more contact tracers. The reality of it, Mr. Speaker, is this government has brought on more contact tracers, far more than we had during the first surge. We talked about the first surge and those numbers, and that's the point. We had 15 contact tracers. We're now, Mr. Speaker, up to 77. 15? 77 contact tracers. We're now at 77 contact tracers, Mr. Speaker. I mean, Mr. Speaker, these are the facts. These are the facts. You just can't come in and say, yeah, you're not doing anything but contact tracing. It is not true. We have now increased the number from 15 to 77, so don't come here and say and give the impression we're doing nothing. Come on.
Now this is getting a bit across the line. Right?
Honorable members.
Because I never said that there was no testing. I never said that there was no contact tracing. I was saying that those, is it effective? Right? I'm addressing issues that they need to pay more attention to. Right? And for you have to, I mean, that was not a, what did I say that was wrong? What did I say that he had an objection to?
Honorable member.
He explained, when I finish if they want to explain what they're doing in respect to what I say, that's one thing. But explanation is not.
Honorable members. Honorable members. Honorable members. Honorable members, just so that all members would understand. If a member rises and indicates the chair recognizes the member when he rises. If the member says he's on the point of order, I ask him to state his point of order. Then I make a decision whether it is well taken or not well taken. But I cannot deny him the right to get up and raise a point of order. I can only make a decision based on what point he intends or he raises on whether or not it is valid, whether it's well taken or not well taken.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, as I indicated, I continue. I say let's make testing free for any Bahamian who may have been exposed to the virus. Let's hire and train more contact tracers. Let's help people who test positive isolate themselves from others while they are infectious. Let's make sure therapeutic treatments are available to Bahamians. Let's take better care of the doctors and nurses who are taking care of themselves, and let us resource them more effectively. Let's give Bahamians the information they need to protect themselves and their families. Let's make our homes, churches, schools, public buildings, and private offices safer with ventilation and air filtration, so we can reduce airborne transmission of the virus. Let's help Bahamians understand the different ways they can reduce their risks. And Mr. Speaker, let's be on the side of the Bahamian people. Let's deliver emergency cash support to help buy food and water and pay for gas and electricity. Let's support small businesses. Let's work with landlords and banks to help people stay in their homes. It's the right thing to do, and it's the smart thing to do. It will help families and inject much needed cash into our economy. Remember, Mr. Speaker, this government asking for sacrifice from people made the reckless decision to spend more than $100 million of the people's money on the empty hotel in Grand Bahama, the Grand Beach Hotel. No one should consent. No one should consent to being lectured by people who make mistakes on such colossal scale.
The member for West Grand Bahama and Bimini, risen on a point of order.
Oh, no.
The member for Cat Island continues to mislead. He is appearing, Mr. Speaker, to have the Bahamian people believe that during this pandemic, a decision was made to spend that money when he very well knows that came way before it. He needs to withdraw that, Mr.
Yeah. Point on, Mr. Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Pinewood on a point of
I
order.
take great exception to that, Mr. Speaker, because we have made tremendous sacrifice to do as much as we can for the people of Grand Bahama. I stood here after Dorian and I heard the principles of Royal Caribbean recommitted for this government. Their commitment towards the development that we've been struggling for to get the hotel up and the expansion of opportunities for the people in Grand Bahama. They are still on board. And it's insulting for the leader of the opposition, to even stand here and imply that the single largest hope for Grand Bahama should be abandoned simply because we're going in this COVID pandemic. These people still need to have hope beyond COVID. And we should not abandon our commitment. When we have developers willing to stick with the Bahamas in the midst of this crisis, how dare we back down? Regardless of COVID, Grand Bahamas still need help and hope. And I don't mean political rhetoric. I mean standing by them. And I also extend the fact that even right now, not a single civil servant has been fired amidst this whole thing. That is commitment towards the Bahamian people.
Thank you, honorable member. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island.
You give away Master Grand Bahama want to take away their hope?
Mr. Speaker, you know, I continue to say,
Honorable members, allow the member to continue.
the truth will continue to hurt. And whoever would have gotten the impression, that I indicated, I asked, I repeated the words, I said, remember that the government did this. I didn't say the government did it now. Remember means to recall. It doesn't mean it happened now. That's what I said. I said, remember this government asking for sacrifice from the people. And they invested 100 million. That's a question of choices, priorities and choices. And that's what this is all about. And governance is about priorities and choices, right? Priorities of government and their choices, right, defines their governance. They choose and prioritize the investment of over $100 million in the Lucayan Beach Hotel at a time which we say ought to have gone in a different way. And if those funds were available now, what will happen now? Right. Mr. Speaker, we can as well as a country enact public health measures we need through ordinary legislation as opposed to these measures and the suspension of our civil liberties. For all the vast powers granted to the common point, he has not used them to date to keep us safe. And the numbers show it. You don't have to speak to me, the numbers show it. He is repeating his mistakes instead of learning from them. One of our nation's leading infectious disease experts was asked to rank our country's readiness to welcome tourists back on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the most prepared. She said the Bahamas is at 1. Mr. Speaker, November 1st is less than 1 week away. All of our alarm bells should be going off. I rang those alarm bells a week or two before the 1st of July 2020. It did not wake up any sensibilities. It did not wake up any thought. It did not spur any planning for the opening. And that's why we are where we are today. That's why I say it didn't have to be as bad as it is today. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Long Island. Honorable members, I don't have a list of speakers. I recognize the honorable member for Long Island. Because he was... Honorable member for Centerville, you will go next.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the dynamic and industrious people of Long Island. It is indeed a pleasure to be here in good health and spirit. First, I'd like to offer my deepest gratitude to our healthcare workers, the doctors, nurses, emergency personnel, and volunteers throughout our nation who are on the front lines defending us from the scourge of COVID-19. The recent death of Nurse Jackie Johnson highlights the grave risk that our frontline workers face each day. Yet they still provide care for the country's ill. Many are working several double shifts per week due to short staffing as colleagues rotate in and out of quarantine. Speaker, I'd also like to express my condolences to all those who have lost a loved one due to the coronavirus. My heart is with you, and I pray for your peace during this time. Mr. Speaker, I want to also extend condolences to a few families in my constituency who have lost loved ones. To the families of Anthony Adderley, his parents, Anthony and Monique, Sherette Tanquest Adderley, her husband Kevin, Orient Adderley, Alvilda Pratt, Venzel Roca, Sherry Miller, her husband Brenville, children Alex, Cameron, and Petra, Mr. Van Dyke Adderley, Andrea, Andy Taylor, and Mario Smith. To those families, I extend my sincere condolences. Mr. Speaker, we are living in extraordinary times. In March, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic. And by the end of the month, the world saw more than 500,000 people infected and nearly 30,000 deaths worldwide. As of this past weekend, the number of COVID-19 cases globally is more than 42 million infected and more than 1 million deaths. As of yesterday, the Bahamas had more than 6,400 COVID cases and 132 deaths. And so, Mr. Speaker, it sounds like a scorched record when I listen to the leader of the opposition criticize, offering no solutions, no concrete plan. In fact, given that the leader himself has been infected, unfortunately, I expected that he would return more aligned with the government's efforts to fight this scourge. Speaker, with the opposition leader this morning, we heard nothing new. He read our plan. He repeated it. And he had to convince himself that it was his own. Clearly, he had convinced himself that it was his own. Perhaps they'll write their plan over the lunch break. Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 pandemic has affected every nation on the planet. All countries have adopted plans to secure the health and well-being of its citizens. The coronavirus has made no distinction between developed and developing nations and continues to wreak havoc on economies and healthcare systems. This year has tested the discipline and resilience of our people. It has called upon us to do more with less and to place the security and protection of ourselves and others ahead of our own wants, even ahead of very popular decisions. Whilst the opposition might seek to traffic in popular musings, no doubt gleaned by sticking their finger into the wind, the political wind, to see which direction the wind is blowing from, we've had to make sage decisions based upon the science, upon the data before us. Decisions that we all know are not favorable. These decisions remind me of those days growing up in Long Island when I, as a child, hated the taste of bitters. Everybody knows that concoction, bitters, or Buckley's medicine. Was told to drink it as it would make me feel better. I know the bitter taste would be for a short while. The relief that followed was worth it. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, it will take a concerted effort by all of us to limit the spread of COVID-19. We have to make radical changes to our behavior. We must wash our hands, disinfect our surroundings, wear masks, socially distance, and avoid large gatherings. I know that we are a warm, social people, and through these measures feel adversative. And though these measures feel adversative, we must abide by them to protect the most vulnerable among us. COVID-19 has cast a grim shadow over many of our homes, and it is becoming increasingly more difficult to find an individual who has not been affected. Nearly all of us know a colleague, friend, or family member who has taken ill or passed away due to complications from this disease. During these adverse times, we have learned to appreciate community, to truly be our brother's keeper. However, there's still more to be done, Mr. Speaker. We cannot underestimate the destructive nature of this virus, and our cases continue to rise exponentially, particularly in New Providence. I must, with a clear conscience, support the motion to extend the emergency order. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, our medical facilities are now operating at full capacity, with difficult decisions no doubt having to be made. We're seeing more and more of our essential workers being infected. Our number one industry, tourism, has taken a hard hit, with many hotels extending their reopening dates, resulting in Bahamians who are employed in or who rely heavily on that industry finding themselves in dire financial straits. Mr. Speaker, the government, however, can only do so much, and it desperately needs the assistance of all Bahamians to get this virus under control. Mr. Speaker, I have personally seen video footage circulating on social media of functions being held with no social distancing protocols being enforced, no masks being worn. It is most disheartening. At times, it seems as if some of our people are simply not taking the severity of this pandemic seriously. Sadly, this lends to the uphill battle as we try to get our numbers under control. As it stands, the emergency powers orders equip the government with the tools needed to effectively mount such a fight. These are unprecedented times, which, lamentably, require unprecedented measures as the government seeks to quell the surge of COVID cases in this second wave. Mr. Speaker, the statistics suggest that when there is a low count day, for some reason, it is usually followed by super numbers. Whilst it is the government's duty to enact and enforce the law, it is our individual and collective responsibility to abide by them. Say that again. Whilst it is the government's duty to enact and enforce the law, it is our individual and collective responsibility to abide by them. Numbers do not lie, Mr. Speaker, and it is apparent that we need to do better. Mr. Speaker, just this past week, we witnessed the Samaritans first establish an emergency field hospital to expand the hospital's capacity for patient treatment. This was made necessary as the Princess Margaret Hospital's facilities have become strained as a result of the rising number of cases in New Providence and those coming to New Providence. As I said earlier, the Princess Margaret Hospital is currently full. They do not have sufficient space. They have manpower and resource challenges due to the virus's impact upon them. Lab services, which are needed to process COVID tests, have been inundated with screenings and, I am told, are also, in some instances, strained. But simply, Mr. Speaker, our healthcare system is currently in crisis mode. This is also evidenced by the need for welcomed assistance from Samaritans First, as we saw with the establishment of that field hospital. As a representative of a island, a family island, that boasts an excellent healthcare team, but inadequate facilities, I have found this reality very, very troubling. We must be conscious that our fellow Bahamians, left vulnerable due to the unwillingness of some of us, we must be conscious of this. And as such, we must take the proper precautions. Mr. Speaker, I recognize that medical care facilities across the country have noticeably increased testing. I applaud them for their efforts. I'm also pleased to learn of a proposed public-private partnership that would secure access to rapid antigen tests, particularly given that testing is one of the best defensive measures against COVID-19. We have many instances of persons being deemed asymptomatic, and so tests will show where the virus is. However, Mr. Speaker, it is my solemn wish, my prayer, that testing would soon be free or become as affordable as possible for Bahamians, particularly with the economic situation. I would also recommend the reinstatement of the COVID-19 hotspot indicators. One can possibly guess where the hotspots are. However, I think it would be quite useful for Bahamians to have some official indication of which areas to avoid or exercise greater caution. And so, Mr. Speaker, again, I support the renewal of these orders, and I wish to encourage Bahamians to be patient, but more importantly, to be proactive. The best defense is a good offense. And by now, we should all know the drill. Distance yourself. Wear your mask. Wash your hands. Mr. Speaker, I want to address another issue today. In my capacity as the Executive Chairman of the Water and Sewage Corporation, I want to specifically note that our family islands are in a unique position whereby they do not have the benefit of major medical healthcare facilities. Many islands have small clinics, polyclinics. As such, we are particularly keen to ensure that they can maintain their hygiene and protect themselves by having access to water. Mr. Speaker, according to the Ministry of Health daily dashboard, Eleuthera has the 5th highest numbers of COVID-19 cases. Given that, and the fact that we are facing the worst pandemic in the last 100 years, a pandemic where clean water and the maintenance of good hygiene is paramount, we were stunned when one of our reverse osmosis operators of foreign origin deliberately and egregiously shut off the water supply to the people of central Eleuthera. Such is especially condemnatory. It is beyond cold and callous. It is simply inhumane and a flagrant and barbaric atrocity against the people of the Bahamas, and most especially the people of central Eleuthera. Mr. Speaker, of all the guidelines to wash your hands in a pandemic, one of the critical guidelines of all the guidelines is to wash your hands. However, the people of Eleuthera could not because they didn't want to, but because of those callous acts. Imagine, Mr. Speaker, a whole community in Eleuthera, thousands of people who didn't have water, several settlements, thousands who didn't have water in their pipes for days, couldn't bathe, couldn't wash dishes. If you have children, you couldn't clean them. You may have wanted water to cook with, irrigation, watering plants, fishermen that are needed to make ice to freeze fish. Imagine that in a pandemic when people have to wash their hands and maintain optimal hygiene. Speaker, this company has a history of conducting themselves in a manner that can harm the Bahamian people. On at least 5 occasions, the company's general manager has carelessly threatened to disrupt the water supply to the Bahamian public. In a letter sent to us a few months ago, he threatened the water supply to Eleuthera, San Salvador, and Inagua. Mr. Speaker, even now, in the face of all that they have done, to them, it is still all about the money. I read this morning's Tribune and saw where they're justifying everything on the basis of money in the midst of a pandemic. Right now, they're talking about setting aside an injunction that allowed people to get water based on legal technicalities rather than apologizing to the people of Eleuthera. They're not saying that they have any merit. They're saying that they're going to apply the set aside on a minor technical point. They have not apologized to the people
Honorable member.
whose lives.
Honorable member.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
If the matter is before the court, I don't think you should go any further in that direction in terms of discussing the matter which is before the court, the injunction and the action to have the injunction relieved.
Mr. Speaker, I would not speak to specifics relating to this matter, but I will speak to specifics relating to our history with this entity. Okay? I'll speak to the history with this entity.
Honorable member, even that might prejudice the matter, so be careful.
I will. Speaker, let me say that any threat to disconnect any island of this country is beyond the pale. Beyond the pale. We've had similar threats in South Eleuthera, and being told that in order to increase water output, we would have to sign a 2-year contract extension, increase guaranteed amounts, and pay more money. Mr. Speaker, these actions, any actions, and these actions have been taken, leaving our communities in peril. It speaks to a lack of a conscience. We, and I would contend, Mr. Speaker, that it was never contemplated that a guaranteed amount under a contract would fluctuate in accordance with a state of arrears at the whim of any company. There's a contractual provision for when there's arrears, and that provision.
Honorable member, if the matter is before the court.
Mr. Speaker, let me speak to. Let me just speak to a couple of questions in the public domain. Okay? And
Not in relation to that case.
Yes, those questions, but Mr. Speaker, those questions relate to payments. Okay? We've made 12 payments this year, one being in September, 1 million, and one being a week ago, 700,000. Those payments this year amount to roughly $4 million. Mr. Speaker, I also noticed false reports on social media concerning the signing of these contracts.
Honorable member, is this still in relation to that company?
Yes. And Mr. Speaker, this is not about the matter before the court. I'm speaking broadly.
But honorable member,
I'm not speaking specific to the court.
you may not speak specifically to the matter before the court, but it can have the same prejudicial effect because you're putting it in the public domain and you're putting it particularly from this chamber in Parliament. We must honor and respect the separation of powers. And so, in particular, I cannot permit you to go any further with a matter that could actually, it could be perceived, even if not actually, it could be perceived as prejudicing the case. That is for the court.
All right, Mr. Speaker. Let me say that to the people of Eleuthera and the wider Bahamas, please note that we will take every action to protect you and your right to have access to water. Okay? We will not do anything outside of the law. We will get the best legal advice. And I want to, speaking to the issue, I want to speak to the order of the court, Mr. Speaker. I believe I can do that. Upon instruction, last Thursday night, WSC lawyers appeared before Supreme Court Justice Indra Charles. They successfully attained an interlocutory injunction. An order was filed and served, and water was restored to the people of Central Eleuthera on Friday past. And that order compelled the immediate reinstatement of production and supply of water to the Central Eleuthera settlement, and warned and urged that there should be no demobilization process or further interference. Mr. Speaker, nearly 2 weeks ago, I made certain comments because WSC's situation was dire. WSC was in a financial state that was dire. And because I was very concerned that people like this would take advantage of the financial situation of WSC. We were dealing with constant threats behind the scenes during a pandemic, an economic downturn for us all. I was concerned that our country was locked into deals with people who didn't care, and concerned about reckless actions. And so, Mr. Speaker, this evidences that expression of concern. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, I note that the opposition has repeatedly claimed that the government owes the Water and Sewage Corporation $80 million. That is simply untrue. Whilst we are owed a sizable government receivable, that is 7.9 million, it is not 79 million or 80 million as claimed by the opposition. And we trust that this correction will be made in their future pronouncements. We note, Mr. Speaker, that much of what we owe externally is due to bad deals, such as this one we see today, the majority of which was signed under the Progressive Liberal Party. Okay? Deals, Mr. Speaker, that gave contracts for terms of 15 to 20 years, just like we see here now, that called upon WSC to provide the land, that called upon WSC to pay for the water production, to pay for the electricity for the water production, that saw WSC grant customs concessions to these entities, that saw WSC pay for all consumables and even drill wells, that demanded that WSC pay every time they start their generators. But get this, Mr. Speaker, that was one fee just for cranking up the generator. And then they paid separately for fuel, plus a markup of 15%. So the generator was one fee, and the fuel was another fee, plus a markup of 15% on the fuel. And Mr. Speaker, a number of other ridiculous, grossly skewed clauses were seen. One was signed under the member for Cat Island, Mr. Speaker, in March 2017 to the same company. And today, the member for North Eleuthera raised some issues with me about the most recent plan that he found concerning in his community. Mr. Speaker, I often joke that my 10-year-old son could have done a better job with such negotiations. So, Mr. Speaker, when we look at this plant, or these plants today, we are talking about contracts signed mostly after the general election of 2002. 2002. Two were signed in 2004. Another signed then in June 2004. Two were signed. Another signed in August 2004. Yet another signed in November 2004. Another one signed in November 2005, which is the one in question today. Another signed in December 2010, which was the only one signed under the Free National Movement Administration, and the last one signed in March 2017. Out of 9 plants, 8 signed under the Progressive Liberal Party. The company came to the Bahamas in 2002 under the Progressive Liberal Party. And these contracts that we now see today, Mr. Speaker, that are grossly one-sided and skewed, well, I hate to use the word negotiated because it barely could be called negotiated, but were signed under the Progressive Liberal Party. The last being signed with the member for Cat Island in the chair as minister. Mr. Speaker, this is gross. And this is to a great disadvantage to the Bahamian people. We cannot continue to pay these bills. We're talking about 70 million paid to a single company in 2002 to present day. 4 plants in Eleuthera. Not to mention another 400 million paid to the operator in New Providence. And then you have other family island operators. So altogether, we paid about 500 million to our operators over the last 20 or so years due to bad contracts, poor negotiations. And it makes one wonder, why would someone sign such contracts given that the clauses were so poorly drawn and not in the favor of the Bahamian people? Mr. Speaker, again, I support the extension of the emergency power order, and I thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Centerville.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Before I begin, I'd just like to say to all that this entire presentation is, in my view, and this presentation will go, Mr. Speaker, deep into an understanding of democracy. So from the onset, anyone who may be offended, I apologize, but our country and our children, it's depending on us for progress. Centerville would like to encourage the government in their efforts. This extension to me, Mr. Speaker, is about democracy and dictatorship. Not a person, but a system of limited democracy and exposed dictatorship. Good morning to all of you once again. Good morning, Mr. Speaker, members of the House of Assembly. Good morning to the constituency of Centerville and the entire Bahamas. To Linda in the Valley, we hope you feel better and we pray for you and your family. I rise, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the wonderful people of the Centerville constituency and all of the independent minds and free thinkers of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Party politics, Mr. Speaker, in the Bahamas, in my opinion, is dictatorship in disguise. This level of dictatorship is then transferred into governance. My appreciation to the senior citizens of the Centerville community, the FOFI generation, Mr. Speaker, that's what I call them. That's the 40s and 50-year-olds, of which I am a part. And all the young people of the Centerville community, I thank you for your support.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Foxhill on a point of order.
Well, if the honorable member would explain to us when the Bahamas changed from a parliamentary democracy to a dictatorship.
Okay, I don't.
The member for Foxhill has an issue with the statement, with your statement that
Okay, can you? I mean, I'm not, Mr. Speaker. I'm not understanding the question of Foxhill because, first of all, in my opinion, politics, party politics, is a dictatorship in disguise. That's my opinion. And in my opinion, this transcends into governance. I don't see what is her question? I don't understand the question.
Honorable member for Centerville, you may continue. Once you indicate that it is your opinion,
Right.
you're entitled to your opinion.
Thank
But
you very much.
you cannot state it as a fact.
Thank you. Okay. Well, I'll continue because throughout this, I will be saying that, so I will refer to my opinion. I would once again like to call on torchbearers, young liberals, as well as the youth arm of all political parties and organizations, Generation Z and the millennials, the FOFI generation, the 40s and 50s, who have lost much because we believed in governance that gave so little. We must all get out and vote. We must all register to vote. We must vote, Mr. Speaker, like our lives depended on it, because it does. As we watch in the United States, record numbers of early voting and record numbers of young voters. Young people, we have to turn to you. The Bahamas needs you. Just let me take a moment, Mr. Speaker, to acknowledge two young ladies, women, from whom Centerville is extremely proud of. Centerville congratulates Ms. Desiree Johnson, who will be ordained this coming Wednesday at Christ Church Cathedral, and to St. Agnes's very own, Ms. Allison Kelly Dean, who will be ordained at St. Agnes Church on All Saints' Day, this coming Sunday at 10 a.m. Congratulations, Allison and Desiree. I am sure you will take your rightful places in history and in this country. Mr. Speaker, we should be encouraging democracy and discouraging dictatorship. Our economy and social well-being is depending on our democracy. Mr. Speaker, Centerville would like to endorse the sermon of Bishop Neil Ellis of yesterday under the hashtag functioning in the fire. The takeaway for me, Mr. Speaker, was the acknowledgement that God is with us always, even in the fire. Bishop Ellis said that his series was designed to breathe new life into your spirit and position you into a place where you can renew your strength. Well, Mr. Speaker, this presentation is designed to do just that. Position us into a place where we can renew our strength. Strength not based on divisiveness, but strength based on unity. Bishop Neil Ellis, Centerville appreciates you. Mr. Speaker, I have said this before and I will say it again. The government appears visionless, and visionless leadership leads to visionless governance, and this in turn leads to dictatorship. Governments in the past, Mr. Speaker, depended on tourism, and when bills and loans became due, they borrowed again. Well, this government appears to be no different. Let's bank on tourism to employ, but borrow to do everything else, even to pay off debt. Just let's borrow, borrow, borrow. That is a system, Mr. Speaker, that will fail us in a time such as this, with Dorian, and COVID-19. Even without Dorian and COVID-19, that system would not sustain us, and our grandchildren will not be able to afford even food. Depending on a dictatorship model is a survival strategy in times like this, because you've made too many promises and to too many people, and you're unable to deliver, so you stop speaking to them. An attempt not only to control their needs, but their wants. It's an undemocratic approach to survival. It's desperation, Mr. Speaker, and the people's days are heavy, and we are exhausted. Mr. Speaker, it reminds me of a lady that I worked with many years ago who, when my ASU drawer was due, she stopped speaking to me almost a month before then. So I was wondering what was going on. She automatically became dictatorial. It reminded me of how she even changed my Pampers and gave me a bottle many years prior. Mr. Speaker, that is where, needless to say, I did not receive my ASU drawer. The political party model, Mr. Speaker, has mastered the hidden dictatorial system. They have destroyed the creativity and ingenuity of democracy and of our young people. They've recruited our young minds because once you get under the party umbrella, your voice is stifled. Once they get in, Mr. Speaker, they can care less what you say, and your ideas matter not. The very thing they said they needed the young people for, it's the very thing they don't respect of them. They said, we like your boldness, your creativity, your democracy. Turns out they like you because you could be muzzled, that you could be bought, and that you put them before your own sisters and brothers. Mr. Speaker, these parties' models must change. This didn't just happen, Mr. Speaker, with this government. Visionless leaders creep into a party system, select dependent candidates because they do not want to be overshadowed or called out.
Chair recognizes the honorable member for Golden Gates on a point of order.
Yes, sir, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I really don't want to do this, but Mr. Speaker, we are here debating a particular resolution, sir. And I gave a while to see how and where the member was going. And obviously, Mr. Speaker, you've given the member great latitude. But I am constrained, Mr. Speaker, to determine exactly so far what the member said, how it connects with the bill that is before this parliament and that we are debating, sir. I'm constrained to see, even peripherally or tangentially, the connection.
You're raising an issue of relevance.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Honorable member, are you going to focus soon on the matter before the House?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I do believe, and that is why, and in my opinion, this is quite relevant. I'm speaking to democracy versus dictatorship. The extension of the order to me is in part relative to what I'm saying. I will decide, the decision that I will make based on this extension is based on whether I believe it's a democratic, an unfair, or a dictatorial process. And so I do not see the relevance.
Honorable member, just link your thoughts with the actual matter. I think the issue is there appears not to be the link. I understand what you're doing. I think you should just attempt to link it a little closer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I will, the suspension of civil liberties really, to me, is an issue. And so I appreciate that we will make an attempt Senator will make an attempt to link the issue of democracy and dictatorship to a request for this extension. For the record, when I accepted to run, I was not promised anything. And therefore, I had no political expectations. The only expectation I had, Mr. Speaker, was one of honesty, decency, and respect. Needless to say, the party model turned special interests, turned very few, did not meet my expectations. Instead of taking care of the majority, Mr. Speaker, the party model takes care of the minority, the very few. Nevertheless, Centerville will press on and on regardless. I am not sure, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad because I'm actually coming up on it, because I'm not sure what, if these sessions are about debates or just a matter of communication. Mr. Speaker, the party model to me that does not even debate for the people's vote as they campaign is another lack of the democratic model. The candidates usually handpicked and are not challenged to speak, and therefore unable to deliver for the Bahamian people.
Chair recognizes honorable member for Fox Hill on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, the latitude is wide. I'm wondering where the party, are we debating the party model? Or how people run for the selection of candidates? Or are we debating whether us, the people here in this room, will vote individually for the extension of the emergency orders? Or are we debating why somebody got into politics and how party politics works?
Honorable member for Centerville.
Okay, I think that was a question. Oh, okay.
Good. And when is it coming to the actual question?
But there is no question.
Honorable members, I believe the member for Fox Hill is raising a matter of relevance again. I allowed the latitude to the member with respect to the concept that he's presenting to the Parliament. And because he indicated that his decision would be predicated on whether or not he's satisfied with the process, whether it's a democratic process or not. I think he is taking a while to get to the substantive matter related to the issue before the Parliament. And I urge you, honorable member for Centerville, to get to the point. I understand the point you're making, but you're taking a long time to make it. Just get to the point with respect to the matter that is before the Parliament.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's such a, I thank God daily for this opportunity, because I did not envision myself being here, years ago, even as I campaigned. But I do understand why the side opposite, or the government side, would want me to get to the point. Is it, Mr. Speaker, a democracy or a dictatorship? That's all I am. That's where I am challenged. Is it, Mr. Speaker, a democracy or is it a dictatorship? Are these organizations polarized so as not to reflect on the critical needs of our people for economic and social democracy or justice? See, Mr. Speaker, the economy plays a role as well in Centerville's decision, because the impact of the economy has us, Centerville, in dire straits. We are in a desperate position. We are, our people still need food. Some are without shelter. Many are without educational tools. And so the direction I'm going is to reflect how the request to even extend this order is something that we feel is undemocratic. Are they that insecure that every election becomes about a matter of trust? Trust is a principle, Mr. Speaker, and should not be an issue that people are voting on. I should be able to trust that the government is doing the right thing for the majority of the Bahamian people. We find ourselves today, Mr. Speaker, in this position because the people really don't have an input in who's brought before them. That party model still needs change. People, Mr. Speaker, I mean, even if you look at track records, but I'm not going to go into track records today because that's going to push us even further in terms of having the people understand why it is important for us to stress and push democracy. Democracy in our lives, democracy in our voting, democracy in our economy, democracy, period. So sorry, for, and I had some references when I was dealing with track record because I wanted to refer to, and, I really would have preferred the member for Kalani to be here since he was a former Minister of Health. I wanted to take a look at his track record, even as Minister of Health, because now we come into a place where he is our competent authority. But, the political party model, again, as I said, gives us what they want to. And that must change. The people must be our guide from bottom up. It was just over a year ago, Mr. Speaker, that I recognized that Centerville was no better off after 40 years of the PLP, and also realized that another year under the FNM would have devastated our community. And that's for existing and future generations of Bahamians. And this is what I'm talking about now, Mr. Speaker, is the socioeconomic deficiencies of the way the country is being governed. For democracy, in my opinion. Mr. Speaker, our democracy is at stake. Our dignity is at stake. Our children are at stake. And Centerville just is simply not willing to sell them out. Democracy or dictatorship?
Chair recognizes the honorable member for Golden Gates on the point of order.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. The member appeared to be making a suggestion that perhaps the rest of us are selling out. He said that Centerville is not prepared to sell out. As a member of this chamber, representing a constituency and constituents, he is not prepared to sell out. He's not prepared to sell out. Neither of the rest of us. Nobody in this chamber is selling out anybody. It's a very strong suggestion that members of this chamber are selling out constituents. And I think the honorable member respectfully should withdraw that.
No, I'm not, Mr. Speaker, I'm not willing to withdraw the fact that I said Centerville is not willing to sell them out. I mean, that's what Centerville is not willing to do. Now,
honorable member.
Sorry.
With respect to the honorable member for Golden Gates, if you look at Rule 33, I think it's 16, 17, 18, and 19, implications of improper motive and You should not ever imply or make statements that could be implied that some other member is acting improper. And the member for Golden Gates is raising the issue that the statement could imply that other members are not behaving as you do. So in that regard, that statement would be deemed improper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'll be guided by your reference. And if we...
So, honorable member, you can either withdraw the statement or I can have it expunged.
Yeah, no, I
Either
mean,
option.
it is a matter of opinion, but Senator withdraws if the member for Golden has
Golden Gates.
Golden Gate, has taken offense. Because we're not here, like I indicated before, to offend anyone. I mean, the bottom line is that we are here today, and we've been here for these many years to progress this country and to move this country forward. Once again, Mr. Speaker, another 30 days? Senator says, for what? You know, like, what do you need another 30 days for? Anyway, let me just speak to, let me thank Senator, let me thank the Recycled Economic Recovery Committee. Maybe I could start there in terms of making reference to why this decision is not, why Senator is not voting for this. We're saying no, okay? So it's just no from this side. Senator would like to thank the Recycled Economic Recovery Committee for the summary report that was tabled by the competent authority. And Recycled, Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding their capabilities, but acknowledging that their ideas and their capacity would be capped by, of course, political influence and maybe selective ingenuity. Mr. Speaker, the Recycled Committee makes no mention of antitrust laws to prevent monopolies and exclusivity agreements in this country. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out what work was done. See, because if the work was done in the Recycled Economic Recovery Committee, then then we can see where possibly an extension is required based on the fact that they're trying to implement certain things over this period of time. But when you read the summary report, you're looking at sovereign wealth fund issues, which is another recycled idea because Senator spoke about that for 3 years, the sovereign wealth fund, and the fact that it wasn't established even by the central bank when the law told them they should. Senator
Honorable member, I'm extending you some more latitude, but again, you are anticipating a debate on a matter that can be brought before the Parliament for debate. The document was tabled.
Right.
It hasn't been debated yet. You're anticipating, and that is against the rules.
Okay, thank you. I did see that, Mr. Speaker, in the rule book, and I'm glad to obviously have your indulgence and the way you help in terms of helping us and, of course, the general public to understand our governance from the parliamentary level. So I appreciate that. So what we would do, Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't touch on the recycled committee. I'll just, because I only wanted to mention that, and of course, the marijuana issue, which I'll save. But I'll move forward so we can now talk about other items that may be more important in terms of our decision, Senator's decision to vote for this particular order. You know, Mr. Speaker, we spoke about being bold. And of course, to me, boldness is a mentality that's actually attributed to democracy, young and brave leadership. But many, again, are too old or their minds are not ready for the creativity of our young people. And so we are not able to accept their monopoly, their democracies. Mr. Speaker, there's so much that Centerville will be recommending for the Recycled Economic Recovery Committee because we are in an economic crisis. And we will forward that in due course. Mr. Speaker, I'm skipping through because I passed the Recycled Economic Committee. I didn't want to.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for North Abaco.
The report of recycled rehashment of whatever. I just want to remind the member that these are Bahamian professionals that sacrificed a lot of time, effort, and energy in producing quite a comprehensive report, which explicates an economic plan. It may not be the one that everyone would like to see, but to denigrate their work and effort and that way, I think is wrong.
That's true.
And I think it should be withdrawn.
Yeah, that's not appropriate.
Honorable member for Centerville.
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Speaker, I would have spoken to and of course worked with many of these professionals, and I would have even spoken to them after they were selected. And we are all professionals, and and they all know I respect their work, and they all know and understand why it's important for younger people to now get involved so that the Bahamas could maximize its potential. So they're not unaware of my position. Every single one on that committee I know.
Honorable member, I don't think that is the issue being raised. The issue being raised is your reference to the committee as a recycle committee.
Who chose them? Recycle them.
I don't think from the chair that is a proper adjective that you're using for that committee. Because first of all, that committee, in my estimation, has not existed until it was recently appointed. So to reference it as a recycle committee has, in my estimation, an adverse and negative connotation.
Well, so should I just explain what I mean by recycle?
No, what I am prepared to do is to expunge any reference to the committee, the economic committee, as being a recycle committee. I expunge the word recycle, and that order that it should not be referred to as a recycle committee.
Okay, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much. We will not refer to the committee as recycled in here.
Honorable member, the co-chair has just made a ruling
Right.
for you not to refer to the committee in that way, purposely or in a backhanded way. Be guided.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Once again, it's always, when God gives you this opportunity, or when people, and the people of Centerville gives you this opportunity, sometimes you get to a place where you become a little bit more educated than you were before you got into this place. And so I'm sure farther along, we will understand why. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Economic Recovery Committee report, and I'm trying to make sure that we don't, because I just had to move the word recycle from there. But
Honorable member. Honorable member. First of all,
Right.
the chair has indicated that you are anticipating that the document was tabled in Parliament. It's likely that the document will be debated at a future date. It is against the rules to anticipate that debate. And furthermore, it is even more egregious for you to be going after the chair ruling to continually discuss a matter that the chair is asking you to move on from.
My apologies.
I understand your passion.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll move on. And, I appreciate that you understand my passion because I understand yours as well. And I think that's important, for us to understand. That's important for us to understand each other as we move forward. So this debate, Mr. Speaker, to me, is about governance. The people want governance for the people, by the people. We are getting governance, Mr. Speaker, that is playing politics with the lives of the people. You're dangling the carrot. Same old politics. And then what? Nothing for the people. Governance is the issue, Mr. Speaker, not 30 days. Because if we trusted our governments, that would not be a problem. Mr. Speaker, I know it came up last week about local government elections and whether that would be a part of this extension order. And I think the member for Bamboo Town would have said they would incorporate that. But Mr. Speaker, there's also the school board elections that were supposed to be in the month of October, when we were supposed to have school board elections, and I haven't seen anything with regards to that. And I'm hoping that is part of this exemption order as well. Mr. Speaker, many things, with the last order slipped through the cracks, I think, because even the credit unions who are statutorily obligated to have their AGMs and elections, which to me is a big issue in terms of democracy, were not even mentioned in these exemption orders. And so we have to, I think there's in terms of deepening our democracy, we have to go to our boards and school boards and local governments and try to encourage and deepen the very fabric of democracy. But when you do things like this, which is, and I hope the government just didn't ignore it, but these are capital markets operations where people have the right to vote for their elected board members, and it was like totally dismissed. A whole year goes by now without proper elections. And so I hope that in this future exemption, because I'm sure it will pass with the way the system works. So hopefully they would include local government, school board elections, as well as go back and look at the financial markets and see how many of those persons, those institutions did not meet their statutory and legal obligations. So the abuse, Mr. Speaker, of these orders to me is setting a very bad precedent. And I hope this is the last of it. I mean, in terms of future generations, because if we effect our laws in the way that they should be, the issue of extensions and competent authority shouldn't rear its ugly head in our democracy. So, Mr. Speaker, on that note, I had some other comments about the $600 million loan with no way of paying it back, but I wouldn't approach that today, since that was just one of the one of the items tabled. See, Mr. Speaker, what has been happening, and I know you're paying attention, but the government, they have been tabling a lot of things or saying a lot of things in their minister statements. And you know, when it's done in minister statements, that means it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be debated. And so that is why, because I couldn't debate it as they presented it, so I had to opine on it in some form or the other. And so that's why it does seem as if, you know, I am stretching a bit in terms of identifying why I don't agree or why Centerville does not agree with the extension. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to wrap up because I did mention a few things here that I think you would advise not to go in that direction. So I wouldn't talk about those issues anymore until, of course, they're brought forward for debate by the government. So we'd appreciate that we would like to encourage the government to bring those for debate, like the report, the economic recovery report, as well as the other things that they tabled last week. The problem we are faced with today, Mr. Speaker, is that the model of dictatorship, it may be a good socio-political model for them, but it's a terrible model for economic growth and development, especially in trying times such as these.
Sure what I
Mr.
heard.
Recognizes the honorable member for Long Island.
Thank you.
Oh, correction. Pottsville.
Just a point of clarification, please, Mr. Speaker. If Centerville is willing to repeat, I'm hoping I didn't mishear his comment about the model of dictatorship. I might have misheard him.
Thank you, honorable member. My apologies, honorable member for Pottsville.
Let me go back to that. Okay, it said the model of dictatorship. The problem we are faced with today is that the model of dictatorship may be a good socio-political model, but it's a terrible model for economic growth and development, especially in trying times such as this. Mr. Speaker, saving our industries and our country, our natural resources for special interests or the very few will not work. But Mr. Speaker, we must transition. We must pivot. We must transition to true democracy. Mr. Speaker, I know I got a few seconds, so let me just wrap up right now. I think it's the last. If you may allow me 1 minute. Thank you. Well, why not? Y'all allowed me 1 minute before. What's wrong with today?
Honorable
What's wrong with
member,
today?
the chair has granted your request.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Speaker, we resented Mr. Christie's call for a referendum and then his pervasive action to override the voice of the people. Time will show, Mr. Speaker, that we will resent this call for an extension. And this is the same type of model that we see over and over again. Centerville did not support the last extension, but we were hoping that there would be something you brought forth out of that last break that you could brag about, but nothing. Mr. Speaker, over the last 30 days, we've seen significant increases in cases, reduction in unemployment benefits, limited access to even healthcare facilities and educational instruments. Now, I'm going to leave the sidewalks and stuff like that for another time. Mr. Speaker, but as we are locked in our homes, I'm hoping that, based on what I'm hearing, you're ordering campaign T-shirts and billboards and campaign songs and all this stuff while everybody in lockdown. Right now, people need food and people need to eat. The very fabric of our democracy is at stake. Mr. Speaker, finally, the entire constituency of Centerville, including the Valley, Roll Avenue, Culmersville, Fort Fincastle, and Mason's Addition, Farm Road, East Street, and Grandstown, we vote no to this extension request. Mr. Speaker, don't regulate us without educating us. To God be all the glory for the great things he will continue to do in our country. Thank you.
Thank you, honorable member.
Wait, let me hit the tape. Thank you. Thank you.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Central Grand Bahama.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I move that the business of the House go beyond the 1 o'clock hour today.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House do extend beyond the 1 p.m. hour. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House will extend beyond the 1 p.m. hour. The chair recognizes the honorable member for the Exumas and Ragged Island.
Mr. Speaker, there are conventions, and the conventions.
Just a minute, honorable member. Honorable member, the chair has recognized the member for Exumas and Ragged Island because he was on his feet. I don't have a list before me. So you will go next, honorable member. Sandra. Chair recognizes the honorable member for the Exumas and Ragged Island.
Thank you indeed, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful on behalf of the people of Exuma and Ragged Island to speak briefly on these matters. Mr. Speaker, one of the greatest risks of COVID that we currently face is one of fatigue. Fatigue by our leaders, our legislators, the hardworking healthcare workers, parents who must homeschool. The list goes on. And of course, the public at large. Because of this fatigue, I attempted not to speak today. But I thought it important to emphasize that this point is so significant that I have an obligation to remind my constituents and the people of the Bahamas that COVID is still real. And to remind them to follow the protocols. And to remind them to boost their immune systems. And to remind our leaders that whilst they boast of making the tough decisions, they're also mandated to make the right decisions. So, Mr. Speaker, today I call on our leaders to continue to be proactive and innovative. Today we find that the large majority of our cabinet isn't present. I believe our leader referred to this as an administrative crisis. And we must continue to plan proactively to manage through the COVID crisis. And what this means in my business is that whilst I have two managing directors, both of them will not appear at the office at the same time. So this question of fatigue is causing an administrative crisis in this country. Mr. Speaker, we have had to deal with and sympathize with many members of Parliament and staffers who have been afflicted. And I wonder whether we are being proactive and innovative in terms of considering the possibility of a virtual parliament. I wonder whether we are being proactive and innovative in considering the possibilities of legislation that we must have in place after the COVID state of emergency is completed. I raised this question over and over, but I am not sure we are further ahead now than we were 5 months ago when I raised this question the first time. So we must not be subject to the issue of fatigue and continue to press forward as proactively and as innovatively as we can. Mr. Speaker, this is a trifold crisis. We have the health crisis, we have the economic crisis, and we have a crisis of leadership. And we cannot separate the three. If we fail to do so, Mr. Speaker,
Just one.
we are going to exacerbate.
Just a moment, honorable member. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Golden Gates on a point of order.
Again, the member is misleading this Parliament and the people. Mr. Speaker, he just said we have a failure of leadership. He said we have a failure of leadership. That is a statement of fact. What the honorable member can do, if he so chooses, Mr. Speaker, he can say, in his view, there is a failure of leadership. But he cannot say, we have, in fact, have a failure of leadership in this country. Because that is not so. It is not so, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker, Speaker, firstly, I didn't use those words. Secondly, I will repeat and I will stand by my view that we have a trifold crisis in this country. A health crisis, an economic crisis, and a leadership crisis. And if we choose to ignore any one of these crises, there will be a tendency and a possibility that we will exacerbate one or all of the three. And I stand by that. Mr. Speaker, I know that the competent authority is watching today.
Chair recognizes the honorable member for Golden Gates.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, he said we have a crisis of leadership.
He must prove that.
There is no evidence that we have a crisis of leadership, Mr. Speaker. If the honorable member wants to say that he believes, or in his view, or in his opinion, he's entitled to do that, sir. But to say that we have one.
I thought that's what it
That's exactly what I said.
No, he didn't. No, he didn't. No, he did not say that, Mr. Speaker.
Yes,
No,
I did say that.
no. He did not say that. No, Mr. Speaker, he did not say that in his view there is a crisis of leadership.
Honorable member, is it in your view
I
or
did
in
say
your
that.
opinion?
Yes, Mr.
Okay, thank you.
May I continue? Yes, sir.
You may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the competent authority is at home watching today. And I know he is watching the performance of the members on the other side. And I know that he is forming a view. But you know, that's not a matter for me. That's a matter for them. So I'm gonna move on, Mr. Speaker. There's a crisis in this country, in my view.
Honorable recognizes honorable member for Golden Gates.
Again, on the point of imputation of improper motive, Mr. Speaker, the honorable member just suggested that the members of the government, whenever they have arisen on a point of order, it was not for the purpose of the point of order itself, but for some other motive outside of what is happening in this chamber at this moment, Mr. Speaker, and that's improper. That's improper motive. That's exactly what the rules say ought not happen. And Mr. Speaker, he needs to withdraw that.
Honorable member, on this occasion, I must agree that if that is what you said,
Not sure what he's talking about.
honorable member, that should be withdrawn.
Not sure what he's talking about, Mr. Speaker. not sure what he's asking me to withdraw.
The members
I made no imputation.
the member is suggesting, let me clarify it from my understanding.
Yeah.
The member is suggesting that you implied that there is some other motive for members rising on points of order today, other than for the purpose of making a genuine point of order.
Yes.
Now, that is a suggestion of improper motive. If that is what you said, that must be withdrawn or expunged.
No, Mr. Speaker, it's not what I said. I don't want to belabor this point. I think we're in a position of serious national crisis. And Mr. Speaker, if that is how it's perceived, I withdraw it. Right? But
Mr. Speaker, my apologies, but I must intervene. He said, if that is how it is perceived, it's not a question of how it's perceived, it is in fact. What did he say? It's not a question of how we perceive it. It's the fact of the matter, Mr. Speaker. You know, that's very clever, and I understand, I appreciate it. But, Mr. Speaker, it is the fact of the matter. He suggested that members in this chamber are standing to their feet, which they have a right to do, and they have a right to object under these rules. They are doing for some other purpose as to impress somebody who's not in this chamber for the possibility of something happening in the future. Mr. Speaker, what could be more improper motive, an imputation of motive than that, Mr. Speaker?
Honorable member for
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I want to move on. Mr. Speaker, I want to move on because we are descending to
Honorable member, are you prepared to withdraw?
Yeah, I withdraw it, Mr. Speaker. But I will repeat that I know the competent authority is watching. And I say no more. I say no more. But I don't want this conversation today to descend from the sublime to the pedantic. So let me just make the point. That this trifold crisis is no laughing matter, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, and it is important that we continue with energy and enthusiasm to continue to fight these crises in this country, Mr. Speaker, is my view. So when we talk about the economic crisis that's ever so present today, it is not without merit to refer to the recently laid economic recovery report. And this is not an agenda item, Mr. Speaker, I say so respectfully. It has been laid, but there is not an agenda item to be discussed. So, I made a statement.
The rule doesn't say that. The rule says that if there is a possibility of a matter being discussed, you cannot anticipate that debate.
Speaker, I appreciate your interpretation on the matter. But there are many things laid here. There are many things laid here in the House, right, with absolutely no intentions of, and unless the government side indicate an intention to debate, it is therefore reasonable to assume that they will not be debated, unless the government gives that intention, Mr. Speaker. Let me just say this. There have been wide public commentary already with respect to this summary report. I have issued a press statement, and I stand by the statement, Mr. Speaker. And these times are so significant. This crisis is so pronounced that we do not have the luxury at this point, Mr. Speaker, of not elucidating and discussing issues of national importance, in my opinion. And in my view, there has to be an immediate plan to address perhaps 3 big ticket items that will cause us to move the needle in terms of the economic crisis. There must be steps to preserve the credibility of our peg Mr. Speaker, and the governor of the central bank has already laid out many steps, and I hold him in high regard and commend him for doing so. Mr. Speaker, I commend the members and the volunteers of the Economic Recovery Committee who have put much time and effort. There's a lot more work to be done, and I invite them to go back to the drawing board, Mr. Speaker, to work on the 3 big ticket items that's going to move the needle, and to develop an implementation framework. The Bahamian people are saying they're tired of talk and they want to see implementation and action. There's talk fatigue in this country, Mr. Speaker. And politicians have gotten themselves a bad name because we have not found the will to execute much of the talk we talk and to implement many of the plans we put forward. So as leaders, I encourage you to not be weary in what you find to be well doing. Do not get weary. I have a few ongoing concerns that impact the Bahamian people. The question of adequate food support is still a serious one. When a mother with a family of 6 call and complain about a $20 food voucher received from the feeding network, I am concerned. I am deeply concerned when evictions are being meted out left, right, and center across our country. I am deeply concerned about the lack of bed capacity. I'm deeply concerned about the issue of mental health. And I encourage the Ministry of Health and the government side to look more closely at this issue. Given the level of fatigue, this is going to be an ongoing concern for the future. I support the leaders' call for massive and free testing. I support the call for the beefing up of contact tracing. Still today, we're hearing too many horror stories of people who are not being called, or who are being called late, or whose contacts are not being called. We acknowledge the efforts of the hard-working, fatigued healthcare contact tracing team. But if we are going to put a dent in the health crisis, we must make this particular effort more effective. So I end on this note, Mr. Speaker. I end on the note that the question of fatigue today continues, in my view, to be one of the greatest risks we now face. And I end as I began, asking my constituents, asking the people of Exum and Ragged Island and people of the Bahamas to not get weary. Follow the protocols, boost your immune systems, and I encourage the leaders to not just boast about making tough decisions, but make significant effort to make the right decisions. It's not enough just to make the tough decisions. Make the right decisions. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Member, in keeping with established protocols with respect to the rules, I just want to make a point so that members would be aware. And that is with respect to Rule 3325, indeed, a member for Centerville and a member for Exumas, in anticipating a debate, the matter must not only be tabled, but also appear on the order paper. And so if the matter is not on the order paper, it cannot be deemed as anticipating it because it need not be debated if it is not on the order paper. So in future, as we proceed, matters must not only be tabled, but they must appear on the order paper for you to anticipate the debate. Just thought I'd make that clarification. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Exumas and Ragged Island.
I believe that aligns with the view that I
Yes.
offered earlier. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the clarification.
As many? The chair recognizes the honorable member for Central.
Mr. Speaker, I
From behind.
rise to move that the business of the House be suspended until 3:30 this afternoon. Catch you there this afternoon.
Seconder. Honorable members. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House be suspended until 3:30 this afternoon. As many members are in favor, will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House stands suspended until 3:30 p.m. this afternoon.